Imagine right now that you are caught in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's 2,000 years ago. The sky is pitch black, the wind is just, absolutely howling, and your wooden ship is literally being torn to pieces by these massive waves.
That is genuinely terrifying.
Right. You are terrified, so you do what pretty much anyone would do in that situation. You drop to your knees on this splintering back, and you pray to the gods with just every single ounce of breath you have left.
Because you have zero other options at that point.
Exactly. And miraculously, the storm breaks. You actually survive. You make it all the way back to Rome. And to show your immense gratitude, you commission this beautifully painted tablet. It's a portrait of yourself in that terrible storm.
Oh, like a votive offering.
Yeah, exactly. And you hang it up in this prominent temple for everyone to see. Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of just a casual observer, right? Someone walking through that exact temple a few weeks later.
Okay, I'm walking through. What do I see?
You look at the wall and you see dozens of these incredible painted tablets from all these different survivors. The conclusion just seems mathematically obvious, right? Praying protects you from drowning.
I mean, the proof is literally hanging right there on the wall.
Right, and it's so compelling.
It really is. You have a very clear action, which is prayer. And it's followed by a very clear result, which is survival. And you have this whole wall full of data points that all confirm the exact same narrative. For a human brain that is just, trying to make sense of a really chaotic world, that wall of paintings isn't just art. It feels like undeniable empirical evidence.
Which brings us to this guy named Diagoras. Marcus Tullius Cicero, the famous Roman orator, actually recorded this story.
Oh, the Diagoras story. Yes, this is perfect.
It's so good. So Diagoras was this notorious non-believer in the gods, and he was walking through this exact kind of temple display with some, well-meaning believers.
So we're probably trying to convert him.
Oh, 100%. They were essentially pointing and saying, look at this wall, Diagoras. Look at all these people who prayed and were saved by the gods. Like, how can you possibly still deny that they intervene in human affairs?
Right. They think they have him cornered with the data.
Exactly. But Diagoras just looks at the paintings, looks at the believers, and asks a single question that completely, totally shatters the illusion. He asks, where are the pictures of those who prayed, then drowned?
Oof. That is the dagger right there.
Right?
It is such a simple question, but it just completely exposes the absolute most dangerous cognitive blind spot we have as humans.
The Diagoras problem.
Exactly. The Diagoras problem. Because the drowned worshipers, the ones who prayed just as hard, or maybe even harder than the survivors, they're currently sitting at the bottom of the sea.
Yeah, they are physically incapable of commissioning a painting.
Right. The evidence of their failure to survive is permanently silenced by the very lethal nature of the event itself.
The dead don't paint.
They do not.
They don't write memoirs. They don't, go on talk shows, and they definitely don't give TED Talks.
Which is a shame, because those would be very informative TED Talks.
Truly. And honestly, that is the core mission of our deep dive today. We are pulling from this massive stack of historical data, statistical research, and philosophy, all to equip you with a mental shortcut.
To expose this massive optical illusion.
Yes, this distortion of reality that the source material calls silent evidence. We're going to dig into how this massive graveyard of invisible data completely warps how we view human history.
And how we misinterpret legendary talent, too.
Oh, absolutely. And really how we fundamentally misunderstand the basic mechanics of success and survival in our everyday lives.
Because we walk through the world so incredibly confident that we're seeing the whole picture. But we aren't.
Yeah.
We are really just staring at a heavily edited highlight reel, and we just assume it's the raw, uncut documentary.
The human mind is just an explanation-seeking machine.
It is. We are desperate for patterns. We need things to make sense. But we only build those explanations using the data that just happens to survive and land right in front of our eyes.
Right, which means we get tricked all the time. This isn't just some ancient philosophical quirk. It's a trap that catches everyone, from, boring tweed-jacketed history professors dropping names like Hegel and Marx, all the way down to us in our daily routines.
Oh, no one is immune.
So if silent evidence makes us misread ancient shipwrecks, how does it completely warp our understanding of human history and, legendary talent? Because we always hear that phrase, history is written by the victors.
Right, which is really only half the truth. Yeah, history is written by the victors, sure. But more importantly, history entirely ignores the cemetery of failures.
The cemetery of letters.
Exactly. We judge historical legacy, and we judge the cultural soul of entire civilizations based solely on what managed to survive the biodegradative assaults of time.
Biodegradative assaults. That's a great phrase.
It just means things rot. And what survives is not necessarily the most profound or the most representative of that culture. Sometimes it is literally just a matter of logistics.
Okay, let's look at the Phoenicians to prove this. Because if you read standard history textbooks, even from incredibly respected historians like Will and Ariel Durant, the Phoenicians get a really raw deal.
They really do. They get pigeonholed.
Big time. They are almost universally categorized as this highly practical, purely merchant race. Like, the narrative is that they were brilliant at commerce, they sailed all over the place, and yes, they gave us the phonetic alphabet.
But there's always a catch.
Right. The textbooks usually add this condescending caveat. They say the Phoenicians only invented the alphabet to keep track of their cargo logs and their ledgers.
Right, just bean counters.
Exactly. The assumption is that they had no real cultural depth, no great poetry, no soaring literature like the Greeks or the Romans.
Because we look at the ruins of their civilization, and we see no epic poems lying around, so we conclude they simply didn't write any.
We judge their entire cultural identity based on a void.
Yes. But the historical research point to a much more tragic reality here. The Phoenicians likely had a vibrant literary culture. They almost certainly wrote poetry and philosophy.
So what happened to it?
Well, they made a purely logistical choice that completely doomed their legacy. They wrote on papyrus.
Ah, and not just any papyrus, right?
Right, a highly perishable brand of it. They essentially wrote their entire cultural history in disappearing ink.
Because papyrus rots.
Yeah, it breaks down incredibly quickly unless it is kept in very, very specific, completely dry conditions.
Like in a sealed tomb in Egypt or something?
Exactly. Before authors and copyists widely transitioned to using parchment, which, by the way, is made of animal skin and is far, far more durable, the extinction rate for manuscripts was just catastrophic.
So if you didn't upgrade your tech to parchment, you were erased.
Pretty much. If a brilliant Phoenician epic wasn't actively transferred onto parchment during that specific technological transition in the 2nd or 3rd century, it simply crumbled into dust.
That is wild. So we sit here, thousands of years later in our comfortable armchairs, judging the depth of their soul based entirely on the biodegradability of their paper.
That's exactly what we do.
We assume the empty space means lack of talent rather than presence of rot. It's like judging the culinary genius of a 5-star chef based only on the moldy leftovers you pull out of a dumpster 3 weeks later.
That is a perfect analogy. You aren't seeing the masterpiece, you are just seeing the decay.
It's a profound injustice to the past. But what gets me is that it's also a huge warning for how we judge the present.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's easy to see how a physical manuscript from the ancient world gets lost in time. But we are completely blind to how modern masterpieces perish in the exact same way. Not from physical rot, but from the harshness of the publishing industry.
Yes, the brutal mechanics of getting published.
Which brings us to the French novelist Honoré de Balzac.
Oh, Balzac.
Yeah.
The ultimate survivor.
Right. Every literature curriculum on the planet hails Balzac as an absolute genius. We dissect his novels, we praise his superior realism, his, profound sensitivity to the human condition.
We build this whole narrative around him.
We do. We act like Balzac's success was just inevitable because he possessed these internal, magical, superior qualities that ordinary writers just don't have.
We attribute his inclusion in the historical canon entirely to his intrinsic traits. But to really understand the illusion here, we have to break down the environment Balzac operated in.
Okay, let's do it.
The research categorizes professions into 2 distinct types of environments. One is linear, and the other is what we call extremistan.
Extremistan. I love this concept so much. Let's really spend some time unpacking this because it feels like the engine behind so much of the silent evidence in our modern world.
It really is. So think about a linear profession, like a dentist or a plumber.
Okay, linear.
A dentist can only physically fix one tooth at a time. A plumber can only unclog one pipe at a time. Their income and their success scale linearly with their physical labor.
Because there's a hard cap on how many hours they can work.
Exactly. Because of this physical constraint, you do not see superstar dentists who make 10,000 times more money than the average dentist.
Right. The rewards are distributed somewhat evenly.
Yes. So if you want to know how good plumbers are in general, you can just hire a random plumber and get a pretty accurate sense of the entire profession.
But writing a book is fundamentally different. Balzac doesn't have to physically rewrite his novel every single time someone buys a copy.
Right. The work is done once, and then it can be duplicated infinitely.
That is Extremistan.
Welcome to Extremistan. It is an environment completely dominated by superstar dynamics, where a tiny, microscopic fraction of the participants take almost all the rewards, all the money, and all the historical attention.
In Extremistan, the winner-take-all effect is absolute, and this just drastically warps our perception of talent, because we only ever see the winners.
Yes. We judge the entire profession of writing based exclusively on the published authors sitting on the bestseller lists.
And we completely ignore the massive, unseen army of brilliant, talented writers who are currently operating cappuccino machines at Starbucks.
We don't judge the medical profession only by the top 1%, because doctors don't serve hamburgers to make ends meet. But we do exactly that with writers.
This is where my brain starts to hurt in the best way. Because think about it. What if there were dozens, maybe hundreds of literary masterpieces written in Paris at the exact same time Balzac was writing?
Oh, it is highly probable.
Masterpieces that possess the exact same superior realism, the exact same profound sensitivity, but those manuscripts just happen to get tossed into a publisher's slush pile and completely ignored.
The cemetery of rejected manuscripts is unimaginably vast. And if those rejected invisible manuscripts shared all the same intrinsic traits as Balzac's work, then we have a major logical problem.
Because we can no longer claim that Balzac's superior realism is the actual cause of his success.
Exactly, because the graveyard is completely full of realists.
It's like assuming you have to be tall to survive a plane crash just because the only guy who walked away happened to be 6'4".
That is a great way to put it.
You rush up to the survivor, you see he's tall, and you write an article saying his height gave his skeletal structure the unique integrity to survive the impact.
Right, you are assigning survival to a completely random trait simply because it belongs to the survivor.
While entirely ignoring the 200 other tall people who died in the exact same crash.
That analogy hits the core of the inferential error perfectly. We observe a success, we isolate traits in the successful person like tallness or realism or maybe a specific daily routine, and we declare those traits to be the definitive cause of the success.
And we ignore the cemetery.
We completely ignore the fact that the silent cemetery is overflowing with people who possess those exact same traits, but just lack the necessary luck to survive the filter.
So if the rejected writers shared all of Balzac's traits, then Balzac wasn't necessarily uniquely talented. To a very large degree, he was just uniquely lucky.
He survived the filter.
And what's wild is that the French actually have a physical, tangible monument to this canonization of the lucky survivors. It's called the Bibliothèque de la Pléiade.
Oh, the Pléiade collection.
These are those incredibly expensive, serious-looking books that affluent Frenchmen keep in their libraries. They're printed on this ultra-thin India paper so they can compress massive amounts of literature into these tiny volumes.
It is all about maximizing the number of officially recognized masterpieces per square foot of Parisian real estate.
Exactly. And if you are in the Pléiade, you are immortal. You are the ultimate survivor. And of course, Balzac is in it.
But the profound irony here is that Balzac himself fully understood the illusion.
He did.
Oh, yeah. In his own novel, Lost Illusions, his protagonist, Lucien, travels to Paris to conquer the literary world. And Lucien very quickly discovers the brutal, random underbelly of the publishing industry.
Right.
He learns about the nightingales.
The nightingales. That is such a poetic term for something so incredibly depressing.
Isn't it? It was the slang bookstores used for the beautiful, tragic, completely ignored works that just sat in the dark corners of their shops, quietly dying on the shelves.
Oh, man.
Balzac wrote with intense cynicism about how literary success was rarely about the quality of the prose. It was about wile, promotion, finding the right patron, or just a completely random surge of public interest.
Just luck, essentially.
Exactly. A publisher might reject a masterpiece without even reading past the first page just because they had a bad lunch.
Right.
But then, 10 years later, if that exact same author manages to get famous through some other avenue, that rejected manuscript is suddenly dusted off and hailed as a work of undeniable genius.
So even the guys immortalized in the Pléiade collection knew the whole thing was basically a casino. They knew they were just the surviving worshippers who didn't drown.
They knew.
Yeah.
But we still fall for it today.
We really do. We look at a classic novel and think it survived purely because it was objectively better than everything else. But okay, let's pivot. Let's bring this out of the 19th century and into the modern business world.
Okay, let's do it.
Because It's easy to see how a manuscript gets lost in time. But surely, today's billionaires and tech founders achieve their success through highly specific, replicable skills, right?
You would think so, looking at the bookshelves.
I mean, walk into any airport bookstore, and there's a massive wall of books written by CEOs telling you exactly what traits made them rich.
Ah, yes. The millionaire fallacy.
Break that down for us.
The research is absolutely scathing about this entire genre of business literature. The ghost-written CEO autobiographies, the How to Become a Millionaire guides, the MBA case studies.
They're all flawed.
They are all fundamentally logically corrupted by silent evidence.
But they sound so incredibly convincing. Like a researcher will interview 50 wildly successful, self-made billionaires that gather all this data, and they find out that all 50 of these people share specific traits. They are all extreme risk takers. They all possess this relentless, almost delusional optimism. They all have the courage to break the rules. And so the conclusion is drawn: take huge risks, be relentlessly optimistic, and you will become a billionaire.
But the methodology is hopelessly flawed. They only studied the high shots.
They forgot to ask Diagoras' question.
Exactly. They failed to study the cemetery of bankrupt, failed entrepreneurs.
Because if you did manage to dig up the graveyard of people who started businesses and lost absolutely everything, what traits do you think you would find?
You would find the exact same trait.
Really?
Yes, extreme risk-taking, unshakable optimism, courage to break the rules. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
You practically have to be relentlessly optimistic to ride a failing startup all the way down to absolute personal bankruptcy.
Oh, wow. Yeah, a pessimist would have quit and cut their losses in year one.
Exactly. The people who lose their life savings are the most optimistic people on earth.
So the graveyard is packed to the brim with courageous, risk-taking optimists.
It is. And if the failures have the exact same traits as the billionaires on the magazine covers, then those traits cannot be the cause of the success.
So what differentiates them?
The single massive factor that separates the visionary tech founder from the bankrupt guy living in his parents' basement is often just plain, unadulterated luck.
Just luck.
The timing was right, a competitor stumbled, a random conversation at a coffee shop led to funding. But the human mind rebels against that idea.
We hate it. We want to believe the universe is a meritocracy, not a casino.
Exactly. We suffer from this deep psychological need for what the text calls retrospective determinism. Because we cannot handle the anxiety of a random world, we invent cosmetic causes after the fact.
Cosmetic causes?
Yes. We look at the surviving random investors, and we dress up their luck in the language of skill. We say she works late, or he eats tofu, or she's naturally lazy, which gives her clarity to delegate.
We construct a narrative to explain a completely random outcome.
We do. And to really hammer home how inevitable this is, the research offers this brilliant thought experiment. It's called the engine of computational epistemology.
Oh, the dart-throwing monkeys. I love this.
It's fantastic. Let's simulate a financial market with a cohort of purely random investors. Imagine we take 10,000 monkeys and we put them in a room with a bunch of darts and a board full of stock tickers.
Pure chaos, no fundamental analysis, no reading earnings reports.
Just monkeys throwing darts at random to pick stocks for the year. Now, at the end of the first year, purely by statistical chance, roughly half of those monkeys are going to beat the market and half are going to lose money.
Okay, so we fire the losers. We take the 5,000 monkeys whose stocks tanked and we kick them out of the experiment.
They drop out of our visible sample.
They join the silent cemetery.
Exactly. Year 2, we have 5,000 monkeys left.
Oh.
They throw the darts again. By the end of the year, chance dictates that about 2,500 will beat the market and 2,500 will lose.
And we fire the losers again.
Right. If we repeat this process year after year, systematically eliminating the losers, the math guarantees that after a decade, we will be left with a tiny handful of monkeys, maybe just 2 or 3, who've beaten the market every single year for 10 years straight.
A 10-year unbroken streak of market dominance.
Yep.
On Wall Street, if a fund manager does that, they're treated like an absolute oracle. People would throw billions of dollars at them.
But there are monkeys throwing darts. The results were generated entirely by random chance. But here is where the optical illusion takes over.
Because we don't see the failures.
Right, because we do not see the massive silent cemetery of the 9,997 monkeys who failed. We look at the 3 survivors and we think, these 3 operators are absolute geniuses.
And this is where the retrospective determinism kicks in. This is where we invent those cosmetic causes.
Yes. A financial journalist goes to interview monkey number 4, who is now a multimillionaire. The journalist cannot write an article saying, he just threw darts.
That wouldn't sell.
So they look for traits. Well, I noticed monkey number 4 eats a lot of organic bananas. That must give him the cognitive clarity to see market trends.
It's so freeing when you realize this, because readers wouldn't pay $26.95 for a hardcover book about a failed business, even if it contained way better lessons than the billionaire's book.
They wouldn't. We want the magical formula.
So looking at only the survivors makes us imagine skills that aren't there. But, and this is a big pivot, what happens when looking at the survivors actually makes us think a deadly environment is good for us?
This takes it from a harmless misunderstanding of a billionaire's ego to something genuinely dangerous.
The health club for rats.
Or the vicious bias, yes.
Explain this one, because this blew my mind.
This happens when an environment is so incredibly harsh that it wipes out almost everyone, leaving only the naturally invincible. And an observer comes along, looks at the incredibly tough survivors, and mistakenly assumes that the harsh environment created the strength.
They ignore the unseen dead.
Exactly. And this bias hides best when its impact is the largest.
There's this great anecdote in the source material about the Russian mafia in Brooklyn. A newspaper journalist wrote an article discussing how terrifying and formidable these mobsters were.
Right.
And to explain their absolute brutality, the journalist wrote that they were hardened by the Gulag. The Gulags, of course, being the notorious Soviet labor camps.
Hardened by the Gulag. It sounds perfectly logical, doesn't it? It fits the classic hero's journey. You are subjected to a terrible crucible, you survive, and you emerge forged in fire, tougher than before.
But it's a massive logical fallacy driven entirely by silent evidence.
Let's lay out the laboratory thought experiment with the rats to break down the actual math of why that journalist is wrong.
Okay, set the scene.
Let's say you and I go out into the alleys in New York City, and we round up a massive, diverse population of 1,000 rats. We have fat rats, skinny rats, rats with weak immune systems, and incredibly muscular, genetically robust rats.
A perfect statistical average of the city's rat population.
Exactly. We bring our 1,000 rats into the lab, and we put them all into a giant vat. And then we begin to introduce radiation into the vat.
We start slowly cranking up the dial.
Now, as the radiation levels rise, the naturally weaker rats, the sickly ones, the old ones, they begin to die. They drop out of the visible sample.
They enter the silent cemetery.
We keep turning the dial higher and higher. More and more rats die. Eventually, we stop the experiment. Only 10 rats are left alive.
These are the absolute strongest, most naturally robust rats of the original 1,000.
Now, a journalist walks into our lab. He doesn't know about the 990 dead rats because we already cleared them away.
Right.
He only sees the 10 survivors.
Right.
He measures them, and he realizes these 10 rats are vastly stronger, larger, and tougher than the average rat on the street.
So he applies the hardened by the Gulag logic. He writes an explosive article claiming that our radiation vat is an amazing health club that turns rats into bullies. He assumes the treatment caused the strength.
But here is the crucial, counterintuitive biological reality that shatters his entire article. Every single one of those 10 surviving rats, even the strongest ones, is actually weaker today than they were before we put them in the vat.
Yes, because radiation doesn't make you stronger. It destroys your cells.
The treatment was purely injurious. It harmed every single biological organism it touched. But because the dead rats are invisible to the journalist, he compares the elite survivors to the general street population, and he hallucinates a strengthening effect.
The difference between the true effect, which was weakening, and the observed effect, which looks like strengthening, is caused entirely by the invisibility of the dead rats. So the Gulag didn't make the mobsters tough, it just killed off anyone who wasn't already practically invincible.
Exactly.
It's like looking at a car that survived a demolition derby, sputtering along with its doors ripped off and thinking, wow, getting smashed with sledgehammers really makes an engine run better.
Right. No, it just means that specific engine block was built out of solid steel to begin with, and it is actually running much worse than it did yesterday.
If we can be fooled into thinking radiation is a health club, where else in our daily lives is silent evidence tricking our eyes?
Oh, it pervades everything, from our understanding of our own bodies to the criminal justice system and even the biological history of Earth.
Let's talk about the physical body, because I am totally guilty of this one. The illusion of the swimmer's body.
It's a very relatable trap.
I look at runners and they look anorexic. I look at weightlifters and they are bottom heavy. And then I look at swimmers and they have these elegant, elongated muscles. So I decide I'm going to start swimming to get that exact body.
It's a completely understandable deduction based on the visible evidence, but it involves a total suspension of true causality.
Because swimming doesn't elongate muscles.
No, it doesn't. Muscle tissue responds to resistance. It doesn't magically stretch out like taffy because you're in a pool. The illusion of the swimmer's body is created by genetic variance and the silent evidence of the dropouts.
Genetic variance gives some people that body shape naturally.
Yes, they are born with broad shoulders and a long torso. And because of those natural biomechanics, they happen to be incredibly efficient in the water. So they excel, they win, and they stay in the pool.
They become the visible sample of swimmers.
Meanwhile, the people without that genetic advantage try swimming, they don't win, they get frustrated, and they quit. They drop out of the sample.
So I'm mistaking the selection criteria for the result of the training.
Exactly. It is the exact same mechanism as beginner's luck in a casino.
Oh, gamblers believe beginners are always lucky.
Always. But why do they believe that? Because beginners who walk into a casino and lose their money immediately, what do?
They quit. They leave the casino and never come back.
They join the unseen cemetery of non-gamblers. Only the beginners who happen to get statistically lucky on their first try stick around to become regular gamblers. So the visible population of gamblers is entirely composed of people who experience beginner's luck.
That makes so much sense. What of the criminal justice system?
We base our profile of the standard criminal on the ones who get caught.
The dumb ones.
Right. There is no newspaper section for the mafia bosses, the tax evaders, and the poisoners who are too smart to ever get caught. They are completely invisible to us.
The really smart criminals are the ultimate silent evidence.
They are. And this filtering creates illusions in science, too. Think about extinct species.
Like dinosaurs.
Right. The fossil record only shows species that left traces. Fossilization requires incredibly specific conditions.
So if a species didn't have hard bones or lived in the wrong environment, they just vanished without a trace.
Exactly. The real historical biodiversity and the real rate of extinction is vastly higher than we think. Life is far more fragile than the visible fossils imply.
The dropouts, the uncaught, the unfossilized, they all vanish from our sample size, leaving us with a totally warped view of reality.
It's all the same optical illusion.
Okay, misjudging a workout routine is pretty harmless. Overestimating extinction rates is an academic problem. But what happens when politicians and humanitarians suffer from the exact same optical illusion?
Now we enter the realm of public policy. And this brings us to Bastiat's rule.
Frederick Bastiat, the 19th century humanist.
Yes, he pointed out a fundamental asymmetry. In society, we heavily reward visible actions and completely ignore unseen consequences.
What we see versus what we don't see. And just a quick note for the listener, we are going to maintain absolute political neutrality here. We're just focusing solely on the mechanics of visible versus invisible consequences as they're presented in the text.
Right. Bastiat argued that governments sing their own praises for visible actions, but society bears the invisible costs.
Let's use Hurricane Katrina as an example.
Good example. The devastation was massive and highly mediatized. Politicians famously promised massive amounts of public money to rebuild. This is highly visible.
Right, they look like heroes.
But what is unseen? The money is finite. It must be taken from somewhere else, like, say, a privately funded cancer research initiative.
And the cancer patients die silently. They're untelevised. They can't vote.
Exactly. A life saved is a statistic. A person hurt is an anecdote. Statistics are invisible. Anecdotes are highly salient.
That asymmetry is terrifying. It reminds me of the September 11th driving casualties from the source text.
Oh, that is a heartbreaking statistical example. 2,500 people died visibly in the towers.
And obviously the whole world mourned them.
As they should. But in the next 3 months, nearly 1,000 unseen people died because they were afraid to fly and switched to driving instead.
Because driving is statistically far more lethal per mile than commercial aviation.
Right. Those 1,000 people died in lonely accidents scattered across interstates. Their families probably didn't even know they were, statistically speaking, secondary victims of the terrorists.
The panic induced 1,000 invisible deaths. It also makes me think of Ralph Nader and the car companies.
Nader gets immense credit for visibly exposing car companies. But even he forgets to trumpet the tens of thousands of lives quietly saved by his seafelt laws.
Because a disaster avoided is invisible.
Exactly. Same for an FDA doctor. A doctor won't prescribe a drug that saves 10,000 people, but kills 10.
Why? If the net benefit is positive.
Because the 10 people harmed will visibly sue the doctor, while the 10,000 lives saved are just invisible statistics who don't even know they were saved. We reward the phony philanthropy of the visible while punishing or ignoring the true heroes who prevent disasters.
This reminds me of the hypothetical legislator we've discussed before, the one who quietly passes a boring law that prevents 9/11 from ever happening.
Right. What is their reward?
They get zero credit. In fact, they probably get voted out of office for wasting time on useless security measures. We only reward the hero who pulls someone from the rubble, not the architect who built a building that didn't collapse.
It's a dangerous way to run a society.
So we pivot from the survival of society to the survival of the individual. Why are we so confident in our own resilience? Enter Giacomo Casanova.
Ah, the Casanova effect.
This is all about the illusion of stability. Surviving a severe risk actually lowers our perception of how dangerous that risk actually was.
We mistake our survival for an internal property of resilience, ignoring the countless others who faced the exact same risk and were crushed.
Let's talk about Casanova. Legendary seducer, adventurer, wrote a 12-volume memoir. And fun visual from the text. He actually didn't look anything like James Bond.
He did not. But he believed he had a Teflon-style lucky star, his étoile.
Every time he hit absolute rock bottom, some magical financial transaction or new patron appeared out of nowhere to save him.
Because he kept bouncing back, he thought it was his destiny. He thought he was invincible.
But he was just the surviving monkey throwing darts.
Exactly. There were thousands of adventurers taking the exact same risks in Europe at that time. Most of them were permanently ruined or killed in a duel. Only the extreme statistical outliers, the ones who survive an absurdly long string of deadly risks by pure chance, live long enough to write a famous memoir.
The guys who died in a debtor's prison didn't write 12 volumes.
Right. There's a great modern anecdote in the text about the Flambeur fiancé.
Oh, tell this one.
An extravagant speculator who always seemed to bounce back from massive financial ruin with a vengeance. His fiancée thought he was a force of nature. He always comes back, she said.
Until one day, he didn't.
Exactly. His luck ran out, and he quietly joined the silent cemetery of former high rollers.
And we do this with cities, too, the resilience of New York City.
Yes. We read quotes from economists claiming NYC has an internal property of bouncing back stronger from every crisis.
But if you run a historical simulator with Carthage, Tyre, and Jericho,
they all had local economists saying the exact same thing right before they were wiped off the map.
Because up until the exact moment you die, you have a 100% track record of surviving.
Right. The core danger here is uninformed risk-taking.
Wait, I have a pushback here. Someone might argue that if we didn't have these blind, foolish risk-takers, we wouldn't have our spectacular modern economy. Columbus sailing into the unknown, tech founders betting everything. Didn't their optimism bring us here?
That is the big question. And the answer is yes, it absolutely brought us here. Economic growth does come from risk-taking, but it comes from the foolish risk-takers who happen to survive. The surviving Casanovas.
We inherited the genes of the lucky one.
Yes, making us overly optimistic. But the fact that it brought us here is exactly like a guy playing Russian roulette, surviving, pocketing the prize money and saying, see? Playing Russian roulette is a great financial strategy.
Oh, wow. That puts it perfectly.
Just because we got here by accident doesn't mean we should continue playing Russian roulette. We need to preserve what we got by luck.
Wait. If New York City is just a surviving Casanova, and the economy is a surviving Casanova, does that mean the entire human race is just a surviving Casanova?
And there it is. The ultimate manifestation of silent evidence. The anthropic bias.
This one makes my brain spin.
It's the ultimate cosmetic because... We look at the universe, we see how perfectly calibrated the gravity and the oxygen levels are for human life, and we assume it was built to our exact specifications.
The anthropic cosmological argument. The idea that the odds of us being here are so incredibly low, it couldn't possibly be luck.
But this violates what statisticians call the self-sampling assumption.
How so?
Think about the millions of adventurous Casanovas, but scale it up to possible universes. If you have millions of universes with different physical laws, the vast majority are dead, sterile, silent.
The drowned worshippers.
But if you roll the dice millions of times, someone is bound to win the lottery. One universe is bound to support life. And if you are sitting here talking
You'd
about...
have to be the winner.
Exactly. You cannot compute the odds of a gambler's winning streak from the vantage point of the winner. You must compute it from the vantage point of the entire cohort of beginning gamblers.
Because conditional on our survival, the odds of us being here are 100%.
Yes. There's a great personal example from the author. He survived typhoid fever in Lebanon only because of the recent accidental invention of antibiotics. Our existence is a consequential, low-probability event that we totally forget about.
And this destroys our need for explanations, right? The cosmetic because.
Completely. We want to know why the bubonic plague didn't kill more people. Historians invent these complex cosmetic models to explain it.
But the real answer is simply, if it had killed everyone, we wouldn't be here in a university today asking the question.
Right. The rosy scenario played out, and the sheer volume of our survival drowns out all other explanations.
Which makes our educational system furious.
It does. Schools force students to squeeze explanations out of history and shame them for saying, I don't know. We demand a firm Aristotelian because.
We draw a bullseye around the arrow after it hits the wall.
We wage a daily double war against silent evidence. Our brains are physically wired to scorn the abstract and only heed what is right in front of our eyes.
We want the painted tablet.
But it's okay to accept randomness. We don't always need a firm because. Sometimes the only because is that we are the surviving rats in the vat. We need to handle the word because with extreme care, especially looking backward at history.
Wow. Next time you find yourself admiring a wildly successful person, a brilliant historical figure, or even just someone who survived a crazy ordeal, ask yourself, what does the cemetery of people who did the exact same things look like? And more importantly, in your own life, what invisible risks are you taking right now simply because you've been lucky enough to survive them so far? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for the unseen.